Hello, and welcome to Gigamon Active Visibility. My name is Mike Valadeo. I'm a senior SE here at Gigamon, and I tend to work with some of our major accounts. Joining me today is Bryant Pham. He is also a senior sales engineer, and he deals with things from our corporate facility. So today we're going to do a little bit of tag teaming and talking about what Gigamon Active Visibility is, what it means, and how you as customers can leverage and better understand some of the infrastructure that works beneath the covers here at Gigamon. So that's what we're trying to give you a little bit more into. So first of all, what is Active Visibility? Bryant and I tend to take a look at this as being a framework. It's a framework that allows us to do certain things so that we can react to events and then take actions automatically. And the whole concept of this is basically to give you, the users, a little bit more flexibility when it comes to resources and time, because we're going to be doing behind the scenes kind of a, if something takes place, then take a certain action. And I do also want to mention that this is a competitive advantage over our competition, simply because Gigamon was early on into this market. We created this market, but we've also taken the steps to do things that are a little bit more and above. And this is one of those that very few people realize we can do some of these. But again, it comes down to the way we've architected our system. So let's take an example of how this works. We'll use some analogies here. If I have an autonomous vehicle that's driving down the road and it comes to a stoplight and it realizes that it's stopped, then the car is going to stop as well. And when the stoplight turns green, we will then proceed through the light. Well, that's an automated process. A similar analogy might be in banking. Let's say that I have a checking account that drops below $500. I may have it automatically add $2,000 from savings. So that's something that could occur. Well, in a home system, let's say somebody enters a bedroom after dark. It can turn on the light. Or if the smoke alarm or perhaps a fire alarm sounds, it could automatically dial 911. And the last example here is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it serves a purpose, because we could say that if WHO or the CDC declares a pandemic, automatically go out and purchase toilet paper. Well, I'm using this example for a particular reason, because it's programmatic. It doesn't matter whether or not it makes sense to purchase toilet paper. The fact is, if you programmatically set it up to do an action, then that action will occur. So that's what we're doing. So now let's get back to reality and not just the analogies. Within Gigamon Active Visibility, it all comes down to conditions. Something as simple as a port up or port down, which, by the way, we know immediately when that occurs. There are some other items out there, like perhaps port utilizations or packet discards or errors. That is something that we poll on a regular basis. And then there's also a time frame perspective. So we could say that if today is Tuesday, do something. So we can be very specific. But all these conditions have to be evaluated. We have to determine whether or not it's taken place. And once it does take place, we can then take an action. And so overall, throughout this presentation, you're going to see that we're going to have conditions in orange and actions in turquoise here. And that's so that we realize what is going on. The type of actions that could occur based on these conditions here might be things like enabling or disabling ports, maps, whatever. It could also be something as simple as perform a command, like a write memory, or perhaps add or delete something. These are things that can occur. It's overall a very simple concept, but it's one that makes sense. And we're going to be going through it in detail with you. Just to give you a little bit of a different perspective on this, does this mean that we have, if we want to take some aggressive marketing things, would we say that this is true automation or machine learning or artificial intelligence? My answer and Brian's answer to you is no, it's really not. Are we automating some things? Yes. In fact, why don't we click on here to look a little bit more about what automation means? Well, automation, especially in our environment, means certain things. Things that might be tied to VMware or things that might be tied to Ansible. These are what it means in our industry. So be careful about the terminology that we use. So I may say that we're automating some things, but don't consider this true automation, if you will, because there's no intelligence behind the scene. It's more programmatic, but it's still important things that we can work with. So now let's get into a little bit more examples of what we can deal with.
Thanks, Mike. Now, getting into the active visibility components, what happens when you configure active visibility is that you create a policy which ties together a set of conditions and actions. You're stating that if a certain set of conditions are met, then perform a certain set of actions. Now, you can have more than one condition and more than one action per policy, but keep in mind that if you have more than one condition, then all of those conditions must be met in order for those actions to take place. Think of it as a logical AND operation where all of them must be met. Now, on the other hand, the actions are independent of each other. So you can have one action fail and you can have one action succeed. Their success of executing is not tied to one another. So let's think of this example where you have two conditions. Let's say those conditions are your car is low on gas, and the second condition is the gas light popped on. And let's say you have two actions, the first one being pump gas and the second one being squeegee your windshield. So let's say those conditions are met. Okay, so you go to the gas station, you go to pump up gas, that's all good. But when you go to squeegee your windshield, there's no squeegee in the bin. So that action has failed. And that demonstrates the way that active visibility can work in that you can have one action succeed, one action fail. There's some limitations to remember about the number of policies, conditions, and actions. Those being, you can have 100 policies per standalone node or cluster. And for each policy, you can have up to 5 conditions or 5 actions. So something to keep in mind there.
Everything has limits.
Sure does. Now, getting into a CLI example of what this would look like, and maybe a little, maybe to illustrate a little better the logic flow, we can see this policy here that is called switch maps. And again, here we have the conditions in orange and the actions in blue. So this policy switch maps, we can see that we're adding a condition called port down on port ID 11x2. So what that's saying is that if port 2 goes down, then perform the following actions. And the following actions are a map enable for map 2 and a map disable for map 1. So if 11x2 goes down, then we're going to enable map 2 and disable map 1. Pretty straightforward here. Now the same example via the UI is, again, really straightforward. This is a screen where we're creating an active visibility policy, and we can see that we're giving it an alias, then providing the conditions, in this case a port down, looking at port 11x4, and then taking some actions, the map enable and map disable. Now here we can see a list of the conditions that are available to you when you are performing these active visibility configurations. There's a myriad of options ranging from GigaSmart conditions for GigaSmart CPU utilization or packet errors or drops. And you can take a look at port receive or transmit utilizations or drops. There's also conditions for things like time of day. So if you want a condition to look for a event on 9 p.m. on a Sunday, you can have an action take place at that time. Now, on the other side of things, we've got actions. From this list, you can see that there's a variety of actions ranging from inline tool behavior, disabling and enabling maps and ports, and doing simple things like a write memory.
Hey, Brian, if somebody wanted to add something else to this, is that a possibility today?
Yes, it is. So the way that active visibility was developed and coded is that it was written in a very flexible framework so that in the future, if additional actions or conditions want to be specified, conditions and actions that aren't already on this list, then we can add that in via feature request pretty easily. So certainly if you guys come up with a important condition or action that would really make the difference for you, then feel free to reach out to us and we can put in a feature request for you.
Excellent, because we always want to make the products better. And the way we do that is by working with our partners, with our customers to do whatever makes the most sense. So if you have things that make sense, let us know and we'll see what we can do.
Certainly.
All right, I will take this a little bit here into more detail because once you get in and start working with the profiles, there are some things that we as SEs are always concerned about. One of them that I always am concerned about is port flapping, because I don't want to have something come up and then go down and come up and down and over again. So what we've done here is we can go into things a little more detail. And one of the examples I want to give you right now, though, is that if I have an action, I also want to have a reverse action. So in this case, I have a condition match that says if there is a weekend, we want to enable something. So if it's not the weekend, I also want to have a reverse map that will be taken care of as well here. So I have a reverse action in this case that says on the weekend, we will disable whatever it is that we do. So just from a general perspective, keep in mind that that's something you want to work with. And then let's move into the example I started to talk about here as far as port flapping. With port flapping, again, we want to have something that keeps that from happening. And so now instead of just having my orange and my blue, I've also got a purple there for duration. So when I'm looking at the condition, I can now say, I want the condition port up to be port up for at least a period of 60 seconds. So that way it helps us to make sure that we are getting the results that we're really looking for. And the example 2 down at the bottom not only has a period, but I'm also looking at a threshold percentage. For example, I'm saying look at a certain one for a percentage level of 80% utilization, and then we will work from there. So that again helps us to make sure and ensure that it really does work the way that we want. I'll give you some usage examples, and these are fairly common ones. And we've talked about some of these a little bit, but just to drill down, some very basic things you may want to do is that if a critical port goes down, automatically disable that associated map. It sounds simple, it sounds logical, because it is, and that's why we've built it into the product. Other things, such as let's say that a port hits 60% utilization, and you're afraid that a particular tool that's associated there might start going off on the deep end. Well, maybe what you could do is revert to a map that has more restricted filter rules. And as a result, that might bring it down from 60% utilization to 30% that you feel more comfortable with. We could also take a 30-second trace at the beginning of each month. For whatever reason you want, whatever works for you is what you want to be able to do. All it is programmatically setting this up to have things take place. The next example here is for redundancy purposes. You may want to have inline traffic go to a backup tool. There's things here. In fact, Bryant will get into a little bit deeper situation with that. And the last one here is very simple. If it's Friday, execute a write mem, whether you need it or not, because we all know we may make changes to our environment during the course of the week. And if I forget to exclusively put in write memory, if for any reason we were to reboot, then I might lose something. Whereas this is an automated way to have it do the write mem for me, just in case I forget to do so. Let's see some more detailed examples though. Here's one in which I've got 3 ports coming in, ports 1, 2, and 3, and then I'm going out to a GigaStream situation in which I've got the traffic split between ports 5 and 6. Well, if port 5 starts getting overloaded, because my traffic is coming in both from a backup server and from the server farm traffic, I might want to set up something to shut down that backup server. And if I were to do that, I could easily say, well, look at port 5, and when it gets too heavy, then take off my backup server information. But if I did that, I would never know when to bring it back. So if we click enter on here and have that situation occur, now we see that we've got that backup server is gone. What I'm suggesting here is in this case, we could also have all the traffic from ports 1, 2, and 3 also go to port 7, even if it's a dead port, and I can use active visibility to monitor the activity on port 7, which would give me an indication of what 5 and 6 are doing. And so in this case, we're using port 7 and active visibility to accurately monitor the overall utilization. So just a little trick here on things you could do. But if we want to get into even more detailed examples, Bryant, take it away.
Yep. Now, here's another pretty interesting use case that we saw a customer asked us for. And in this scenario, they had a desire for redundant tunnel interfaces connected to their network. Now, the problem with having duplicate tunnel interfaces connecting to your network is, of course, you're going to run into duplicate IPs, and obviously that's a no-go. So what we did here is that, if you can see, we did end up configuring duplicate tunnel interfaces, but by default, only one of those is active. The other one will be disabled. So active visibility, when it detects that the active tunnel interface goes down, it's going to disable it and then enable the second tunnel interface, thus providing our redundant links to the network so that the ER span tunnel can still establish a connection. Now, as Mike mentioned in the previous slide where he had the reverse policies configured to the reverse actions, it's really important in a scenario like this, because if you don't have that reverse action and that original interface comes back online, well, you've got that duplicate IP problem all over again. So it's really important to make sure that your reverse action states that if the original port comes back up, then disable that second interface so that you only have one tunnel interface connected to the network at any given time. Now, this is another more complex scenario that active visibility was able to solve for us. In this situation, we have the want for an active-active inline deployment with 2 HC2s and 2 inline tools, each connected to each HC2. And here we have the traffic being split across both HC2s evenly, so that traffic is split to the first firewall on the first HC2, and traffic is split to the second firewall on the second HC2. We can see here that we've got a dummy link for active visibility, which when an HC2 goes down, the dummy link will go down as well, thus allowing us to trigger an active visibility policy. So let's take a look real quick at the inline flex maps that are on the first HC2, just so that you can understand the flow of traffic a little better. You can see that we have a few maps here. This first map, what it's actually doing on this first HC2 is that it's taking the even IP address traffic and sending it to the inline tools. If it's odd IP traffic, we're bypassing it and sending it to the second inline tool for inspection, so that we're splitting traffic evenly across both nodes based on even or odd IP. Now, if active visibility detects that the second HC2 or the first HC2, but in this example, I'm using the second. If it detects that the second HC2 goes down, we'll see that the dummy link fails, and then active visibility will then trigger or enable a flex map so that rather than just seeing the even IP traffic on the first node and bypassing the odd, now it's going to see the even and odd traffic in its inspection flow, so that we're accounting for all of the traffic on one HC2 and one firewall in case of a failover situation.
Great. Now, Bryant, on that situation here, I realize that this is a fairly complex example, but can't we already do that today with RIA?
Great question, Mike. Yeah, so resilient inline arrangements is a fairly new addition to our feature set, which allows for a active-active inline scenario. Now, this use case here, we actually saw implemented before RIA was available. So active visibility was used to solve this hole in our solution that we didn't currently have a solution for.
Great. Okay, let's move on and take a look at how this looks internally.
Sure, yeah. And really quickly, I just wanted to glance over that there are multiple policies to make this happen, right? We have to enable and disable specific flex maps based on that dummy link coming up and down. Now, the last part of our presentation is a live example. And here we have a really simple use case where we have network traffic coming in on 11x2 and being sent to some tools here. We have a primary tool and a standby tool. Now, by default, we're only going to send traffic from port 1 to port 2, which is our primary tool. However, we have a standby tool on port 3 just in case the primary tool fails. So let's go ahead and head into our Fabric Manager to take a look at how we can configure this failover behavior using active visibility. So here in my Fabric Manager, I have my HC3 that I'm going to be performing this configuration on. And if we take a look at the ports here, we can see that we have that behavior that, or scenario that was set up on that slide you just saw. We have port 1 as our network port with the traffic coming in, port 2 for our primary tool, and port 3 as our standby tool. Now, likewise, we can take a look at the maps. We have we have map 1, which is our active map, sending traffic to our primary tool, which is enabled by default. And we have our standby map, which would send traffic to our standby tool, but that's disabled by default since we're going to switch over to that only in the event of a failover. Now let's configure the active visibility policy to make that failover possible. So to do that, we're going to active visibility on the left-hand side and taking a look at the policies. And this is where you can create your active visibility situation. So here for this policy, I'm going to call it primary down for our primary tool going down. And for this condition, I'm going to look at a port down condition on port 2. So this condition looks for if port 2 goes down, then execute the following actions. And the actions I'm going to take are, I'm going to disable my primary map, and I'm going to enable my secondary map so that traffic can go to my standby tool.
And again, it's those three things we've been talking about within this, is that you have your condition, you have the policy, and then you have the action. And that's exactly what you just showed here. So let's see what happens, how it works.
Right. Now keep in mind, we do need this second policy here for the reverse scenario. So
Absolutely,
when the standby, or sorry, when the active or primary tool comes back up. In this case, the condition will be a port up condition on that port 2 for our primary tool. And the actions are going to be the opposite. So in this case, we'll enable our primary map and we'll disable our secondary map for our standby tool. So now we'll have traffic going back to our primary tool instead of being routed to our standby tool.
Just the reverse of the other one.
Exactly. All right, okay. Now we can see that both conditions or both policies are configured and enabled. Then let's see this in action. Let's simulate a tool failover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the ports and just do a admin disable on the primary tool to simulate that tool going down. Disable that there. And really quickly, I'm going to go to FM and I'm going to rediscover this HC3 because the way that FM works is that it's polling the HC nodes on the interval to see what configuration or status is up to date. So since I just made that change and I want to see that instantly, I'm just doing a rediscover so I can see those changes right away, rather than waiting for that polling.
Even though the action may have been seen by Active Directory or by our capabilities here immediately, it may not be shown in Fabric Manager. So that's why we're taking the shortcuts here.
Exactly. Now we can see that there is report history for this policy, meaning it was triggered. So we can see that the condition for port down on 11x2 was met, and the actions for disabling a map and enabling were a success as well. So to verify that, let's go over to our maps, and we should see our primary map disabled and our secondary map enabled. And would you look at that? Active map enabled is false, and standby is enabled true. So active visibility was able to account for that primary tool failure and route traffic to our standby tool.
Great.
Now, on the flip side, if I wanted to just quickly re-enable that, we would see that active visibility would disable the standby map and re-enable the primary map to send traffic back to our primary tool. And really, guys, it's easy as that. Active visibility is very straightforward to configure, especially for scenarios like this. With that, I'll go back to our deck.
Great. So what we're doing here is we wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned. This is something that we have built into the product. Like I said, it's part of our infrastructure, but there are some things you need to be aware of. For example, I talked a little bit about things like port flapping. Well, there's also other things you need to be concerned about. For example, logic loops. Because this is logical and you're programming it, be careful of what you do. For example, if I were to say, if port A is down, then bring down port B. And I also said, if port B is down, bring down port A. If I did that, then what's going to happen is I will get into a logical loop here so that I'm going to have everything down all the time. So you don't want to do that. One of the ways that you can get around that, of course, is by using different constructs. For example, check for my ports and then disable a map. So I could say if port A is down, then disable map. And that's the kinds of things that Bryant was showing you here just a moment ago. There are some other things we can do, like taking advantage of timers. And there's different kinds of timers I'm talking about. One is I may want something to only happen on a Saturday or happen on the weekend or happen the first Tuesday of the month. Whatever that happens to be, I can set up a timer to do that. But I can also use my timer for my port flapping situations to say, make sure that the condition is met for a period of time. And that could be 1 second, 60 seconds, an hour, whatever you want things to be, you can set that up. So use those as a best practices to take care of the timing events here. Use that to your advantage. Another example is I may want to know when something occurs because maybe I'm setting up this whole process for something that I consider to be very unusual to happen. Well, I may want to have an alarm generated when the condition takes place. That's as simple as using the terminology policy trigger. If I add that into the CLI command, it will automatically generate an SNMP trap whenever that has occurred. Or the same thing using the GUI, there's just a checkbox in there that allows you to have that trigger take place. So again, that's another best practices and something that is good to use. And one of the other last lesson learned I want to mention is during the case of a reboot, the active visibility daemon is one of the last ones to start polling again. So if you do a reboot and the system is down for 5 minutes or whatever it happens to be, and you immediately are expecting active visibility to take place, it might not happen immediately. Make sure your system is secure so that that polling will take place and you'll have what you need. So that's some of our lessons learned. And what we've done today is we've talked about active visibility. We've showed you how to use it. We've given you a live example running it in Fabric Manager. And overall, this is pretty simple stuff, but we think it's very powerful. And that's the kinds of things we want to share with you. So thanks for joining and thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.